The atmosphere in the room was thick with unease, and my heart raced as I attempted to steady myself. It was one of those lazy, quiet afternoons where time felt like it was dragging. I believed I had the house to myself as Alex, my stepson, was supposed to be out with his friends for the entire day, leaving me with some much-needed solitude. My husband had been away on a business trip for weeks, and although I cared for him deeply, the loneliness had begun to creep in. I didn't anticipate anything unusual that day, but sometimes curiosity gets the better of us. Recently, I had purchased a toy meant to entertain me during those long solitary nights. I wasn't certain if I'd actually use it, but it had been sitting in my drawer, beckoning to me. With no one around, I figured today was as good a time as any to give it a shot. As I pulled it out of the box, excitement mixed with nerves coursed through me. My hand shook slightly as I held it, glancing around the empty space as if expecting someone to appear. But I was alone. I reminded myself it was just me, and no one would ever find out. I let the toy do its thing, and for a brief moment, I lost myself in the exhilaration. Out of nowhere, the door creaked open. I froze, my heart racing as I hurried to cover myself and hide the toy, but it was too late. There stood Alex, wide-eyed and clearly shocked. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Time seemed to come to a standstill as we both grappled with what had just unfolded. Embarrassment and panic washed over me. What could I possibly say? How could I explain this situation? Alex cleared his throat, his face flushing a deep crimson. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, quickly turning away. "I didn't mean to walk in on you." My voice felt trapped in my throat, but I managed to stutter. "It's okay. I didn't know you were home." He nodded, retreating from the room rapidly, but the awkwardness hung heavily in the air. I realized something had shifted between us, and it wouldn't be easy to undo. My thoughts raced. What if he told his father? What if this ruined the rest of the day? I couldn't stop worrying about it. Every time I walked past Alex's room, I felt my cheeks heat with embarrassment. But there was something else I couldn't overlook. The look in his eyes when he caught me wasn't merely shock. It lingered too long. Days passed as I tried to avoid him, keeping busy and acting as though nothing had happened. Yet that moment replayed in my mind over and over. Yes, it was humiliating, but it was also strangely thrilling in a way I didn't quite understand. I felt guilty for even considering it, but I couldn't shake the feeling. There was something about being caught in such a vulnerable moment that stirred something within me, something I couldn't dismiss. A week later, I found myself alone in the kitchen when Alex walked in. His presence instantly made me tense. We hadn't addressed what happened. Part of me hoped we never would, but the silence between us was becoming unbearable. He lingered for a moment, as if deciding whether to speak, then finally broke the quiet. "About the other day," he began, his voice low and uncertain. "I don't really know how to say this, but it's been on my mind." My heart skipped a beat. "It's fine, Alex. We don't need to talk about it," I interjected quickly, wanting to brush it aside. He shook his head. "No, I think we should." Our eyes locked, and for the first time since that awkward moment, I sensed something in his gaze, curiosity, yes, but also something deeper. "I've been thinking about it a lot. I didn't expect to see that, but now I can't stop thinking about it." His words caught in my throat as I understood the implication. The way he looked at me felt inappropriate for a stepson directed at his stepmother. It was intense, almost yearning. I swallowed hard, trying to maintain my composure. "Alex, it was a mistake. We should forget it happened," I said, my voice shaky, but instead of backing down, he moved closer. "I don't think I can forget about it," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've never seen anything like that before." His words trailed off, but I understood exactly what he meant. My heart raced as I struggled to comprehend the situation. I knew I should end this, tell him to leave, but something within me was drawn to the tension. "What are you saying, Alex?" I asked, my voice quivering. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "I can't stop thinking about you, about what I saw. I know it's wrong, but I can't help it." My mind whirled. This crossed a line that we could never uncross. Yet the way he looked at me, the uncertainty and desire in his voice, stirred something deep within that I hadn't anticipated. I knew I should put a stop to it, but I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and stepped a little closer. "This is dangerous, Alex," I whispered. He nodded, his eyes locked onto mine. I know, he murmured back. But I've never felt this way before. Like I can't control it. The rational part of me screamed to walk away, to halt this before it spiraled into something regrettable. But the lonely part of me, yearning for attention, couldn't resist the pull of his gaze. Before I knew it, we were standing too close. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and the air between us crackled with electricity. I trembled not just from fear but from excitement. This is wrong, I whispered, yet I didn't move. Alex nodded again but didn't step back. His hand reached out, hesitating just before brushing against mine. The contact sent a jolt through me, and suddenly all the reasons for not going down this path faded away. In that moment, the world around us vanished. The house, the potential consequences, even the guilt, it all disappeared. It was just him and me in the kitchen, teetering on the brink of something perilous, something neither of us could resist. His hand glided softly up my arm, sending a shiver racing down my spine. "We don't have to do anything," he murmured, his voice heavy with emotion. "I just needed you to know how I feel." My mind was in turmoil, caught between the escalating desire within me and a voice in my head warning me that this was a mistake. But as his fingers brushed against my skin, I felt my defenses begin to crumble. Without even thinking, I leaned in, my lips grazing his. It was a fleeting, tentative kiss, but it ignited my heart. When I pulled away, we both stared at each other, stunned by what had just transpired. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at me, his eyes a blend of guilt and yearning. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to. I shook my head, stepping back. "This can't happen," I said, my voice shaking. "We can't." Yet even as I spoke, a part of me wanted to abandon all caution. There was a part of me that craved to surrender to the moment and the exhilarating tension growing between us. The rest of the evening slipped by in a haze, neither of us mentioning what had occurred. But the tension was palpable. The thrill and danger of it all was intoxicating. I realized we were on the verge of something that could change everything. Lying in bed that night, my mind raced with questions. What had I done? What were we embarking on? No matter how hard I tried to push those thoughts aside, I couldn't shake the thrill that came with that forbidden kiss. Deep down, I recognized that this was merely the beginning of something much more complicated. The following morning, I awoke feeling a weight of unease, my mind replaying the events of the night before. What had started as a moment of curiosity had evolved into something far more perilous. I couldn't stop thinking about the kiss, how Alex had looked at me, and how I had reacted as I went through my day. I attempted to concentrate on my usual tasks, but everything felt altered now. Every time I encountered Alex or heard his voice from another room, my heart raced. I felt guilty for the thoughts that invaded my mind, yet I couldn't ignore the thrill that simmered beneath the surface. That evening, I found myself alone in the living room, trying to distract myself with a book. The house was silent, and for a brief moment, I wished that things could return to normal, that Alex would decide to forget what had transpired and we could act as if it were just a mistake. But deep down, I knew that wasn't realistic. Just as I began to relax, I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Alex. He stood there in silence for a moment before breaking it. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice soft yet steady. I closed my book, feeling the gravity of the situation settling over me. "Alex, I don't think..." I started, but he interrupted me. "Please," he said, stepping closer. "I just need to say this." Reluctantly, I nodded and gestured for him to take a seat. He sat down on the couch opposite me, his eyes locked onto mine. The intensity of his gaze made my pulse quicken, and I realized this conversation was about to alter everything. "I've been thinking about what happened," he began, his voice low and calm. "I know it's complicated and I know we shouldn't, but I can't stop thinking about you. About us." I opened my mouth to object, but he continued before I could speak. "I know you feel it too," he said, urgency in his tone. "I saw it in the way you looked at me. I felt it in that kiss." My heart raced as I searched for words, anything to halt this before it spiraled out of control. But he was right. There was something undeniable between us. "This is wrong, Alex," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You know that." He nodded. Yet there was a determined look in his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. "I know it's wrong," he replied. "But that doesn't change how I feel. I've tried to push it away to forget about it, but I can't. Every time I see you, it's all I can think about." The raw emotion in his voice crashed over me like a wave, and I found myself unable to look away. The room felt smaller, the air thick with tension, and I sensed my resolve weakening. My mind was a battleground, torn between what was right and what I desired. "Alex," I began. But he leaned forward, his hand brushing against mine. "Just listen," he whispered. "I know this is complicated, but I can't keep pretending. I want you. I've never felt this way about anyone before." His words hung in the air, heavy with significance. I could feel the heat rising between us, an irresistible magnetic pull. I knew I should stand up and walk away, to end this before it escalated any further. But instead, I remained frozen in place, captivated by the intensity of the moment. Slowly, cautiously, Alex moved closer. His hand gently caressed my cheek, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. Every nerve in my body tingled, my heart pounding so loudly that it drowned out everything else. "I don't want to make this harder for you," he murmured, his thumb softly tracing the curve of my jaw. "But I can't help myself." His lips were so close to mine that I could feel the warmth of his breath. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to put a stop to this. Yet my body betrayed me. I leaned in, closing the gap between us until our lips finally met in a slow-burning kiss. The kiss was electric, sending shockwaves through my body. It felt as if all the tension, all the forbidden longing, had finally burst free. The room around us faded away, leaving just the two of us wrapped in our own world. When we finally pulled apart, we were breathless, our foreheads resting against each other. The weight of what we had just done hung in the air, thick with tension. Still, neither of us moved. We were reluctant to break the spell. "We can't keep doing this," I whispered, my voice barely above a murmur. "I know," he replied, his breath unsteady. "But I don't want to stop." We sat there in silence, the space between us heavy with unspoken thoughts. I was acutely aware that we were treading on dangerous ground. However, the allure of desire and excitement was overwhelming. It felt like an addiction, pulling us deeper with each passing moment. That night, after Alex went to bed, I lay awake, my thoughts swirling. What had started as a fleeting moment of curiosity had spiraled into something far more complicated. I had no idea how to manage it or how to put an end to it. The line had been crossed, and there was no turning back now. The following days flew by in a haze of stolen glances and silent tension. Whenever Alex and I found ourselves alone, the air crackled with unspoken desire. We never addressed what had happened, but the connection between us was impossible to ignore. One evening, after my husband turned in early, Alex came into the kitchen again. This time there was no hesitation. The instant he walked in, I felt the intensity between us surge. Without a word, he crossed the room and kissed me, his arms encircling my waist as if he had been holding back for far too long. This time I didn't push him away. We surrendered to the moment, the thrill of the forbidden heightening every sensation. It was reckless and dangerous, but I couldn't stop myself. We were caught in a web of desire with no clear escape. As days turned into weeks, our secret deepened, concealed beneath the surface of our daily lives. We were always cautious, perpetually on edge, but the excitement only made it more intoxicating. Deep down, I understood it couldn't last. Eventually, we would get caught, and the consequences would be severe. Yet for now, in those quiet moments when it was just the two of us, nothing else mattered. And although I realized how devastating the fallout could be, I couldn't help but cherish every stolen kiss and every whispered word. Sometimes the things we crave most are the very things that have the power to destroy us.